Well, welcome everyone. I'm Hollie M'gog, as Aisha said, and this is a talk today on social groupings. And what are we going to look at? We're going to look at social hierarchies among mostly mammals, but I am also going to talk about birds and insects. We're going to look at social systems. Very simply, this is monogamous versus non-monogamous, where you have a partner for life or when you don't have a partner for life. We'll look at reproductive strategies. Basically, that's, are you an R species or are you a K species? And we're going to look at sexual behavior. So the very first thing I want you to do is where I want you to pull yourselves into the moment. I want you to feel your feet on the ground. I want you to feel the person next to you. And I want to bring you into nature. And to do that, we're going to start the first 2 minutes with silence, watching something absolutely incredible. Just like that, 500,000 starlings have disappeared into the grass. That is something that we have all over our continent. That is called a murmuration of starlings. Now, we have starlings, but we also have red-billed qualia. Red-billed qualia are the most numerous bird on the planet, apart from chickens, I have to say. But can you imagine how those birds fly like that without bumping into each other, understanding the movements of every other one of your flock? That is, to me, the thing that can bring you into nature. That is what exists outside these walls. Okay, so social hierarchies is the first thing we're going to look at. And these, of course, play a super important role in determining how a species interacts with each other and how that group of individuals within that species are. Now, these overlap in some places with the social grouping, so don't muddle them up. All right, so looking at dominance hierarchies then. Well, these are the social structures where individuals within a group, they're ranked based on their social status or their dominance. And I'm sure you can think about places in your friendship groups, in your families, where you feel there might be a dominance hierarchy. And these are actually super common in a lot of mammal species, including primates. Now, on the left-hand side there, you're going to see a monkey that you don't get in Namibia. This is a Sykes monkey. And on the far right, you're going to see the African wild dog, which you definitely do get in Namibia. Now, in this sort of setup or this hierarchy, dominant individuals, they are the ones who have priority to resources. That means food and water. And of course, mating opportunities. So the subordinate individuals may have to wait their turn, or in some cases with mating, never ever get the chance to mate, unless they're pretty good at bending the rules, which some individuals are. All right, so then we have matrilineal hierarchies. And these are a bit different because it is the dominant female. So you've still got dominance, but in a dominance hierarchy, it's usually the male. In a matrilineal hierarchy, there is a dominant female who is the matriarch of a group. And we're going to see this in elephants and whales. Now, it also means that those females will stay with the group generally, because they form extra strong social bonds with the other females in the group because they are their relatives. It is the males who have to leave the group when they become sexually mature, and they will get forced out of there because obviously it is not in a species' interest to have the males mating with sisters or mothers or aunts. So now it would have been, and it is still the case in most places, that the matriarch is the oldest and the most experienced female in the group. So she's the one who calls what activities the group makes and what movements the group makes. But especially with elephants, we are starting with the poaching to see differences, that it may not be the oldest and it may not always be the most experienced in one area. It's usually now a broad area to understand climate and drought, but also poaching pressures and also people. All right, so we've got linear hierarchies. And of course, this is the same sort of thing in a dominance, but in a dominance, you have your alpha, and then everybody else comes below. In a linear, you fit in a pecking order. So there are social structures where you're ranked in a linear fashion. So each individual has a clear rank, which is then relative to all of the others in the group. Lions, hyenas, they have these. Chickens. If you watch at home, to understand social hierarchies, chickens are one of the most incredible to watch. And these dominant individuals, they have the priority access to resources and again, to mating opportunities. And then we have fission fusion. I hope that's self-explanatory. But of course, in these, the social groups will come together and then they'll break apart over time. And that, of course, depends on the availability of resources. If there's a lot of food, you may have animals coming together because they are social. And if there's not, they'll move apart so that they can find enough food to support themselves. Primates will do this, giraffes will do this. And then within that group, you will have individuals that form temporary subgroups. And that is honestly to do with age, to do with sex, and to do with friendships. So yes, animals form very, very strong friendships. So think about those four and think about when you see them in your chickens, in the street dogs, in any of the animals you see around, in the sparrows, in the trees or on the ground, you're going to see one of these hierarchies. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is social systems, solitary social systems. Now remember that social systems, these have evolved over millions of years. They really have. And the reason they exist, the reason that animal lives in that system is because that offers it the best protection, the best foraging, and remember foraging is food, and the best reproduction options. Now, this system works best on optimal functioning group size. And I'm not going to go into that because it is self-explanatory. Optimal functioning group size. What works is what they use, pretty much. So, in a solitary social system, some species will live their whole lives alone, and they will only come together for courtship, for mating, and perhaps to feed or to drink if there's resources in one place. They'll hunt alone, but in bad years, they may need to form relationships. And some of these relationships are pretty interesting. They may even be interspecies. But what we have here is 3 species you have in Namibia: the leopard, the African jacana, and the black rhino. How do I know that's a black rhino? Because look at its front lip, it's hooked. So the other name for the black rhino is the hook-lipped rhinoceros. Now, the leopard, if she has a female, only the female will remain in her territory for some time. The male will be pushed out pretty soon. In jacanas, it's actually the male jacana that raises the chicks. Now, rhino is interesting because if we look back in history, the explorers that went up through Africa, they have documented herds of 20 to 30 black rhino together. So what we don't know is, do we call them solitary because they have changed their social system in order to survive better because of poaching pressure? So yes, right now we class them as solitary. Male warthogs, most snakes are solitary. Crocodiles, serval, even some fish species are solitary because that's what allows them to survive and pass on their genes. All right, what about monogamous pairs or pair bonding? And those are not interchangeable. It's not the same thing. So some species are going to mate for life. That means they'll engage in grooming, nest building, and caring for their offspring together. And even if they separate for part of the year to go and find food like penguins, they will come back and find their same mate again and again and again. Some of those pair bonds or monogamous pair mating that lasts forever can last 70 years. 70 years you're coming back to find that same mate. Now in the images here on the top left, you see the African penguin. This you get on the Namibian coastline. In the middle is the barn owl, a really common owl. One of those owls dies from insecticide or rodenticide poisoning. Its mate is going to be calling for months and months and months. And it doesn't mean that that mate's never going to mate again. It means it has to find another mate who has not yet formed a monogamous pair. And there we have black-backed or silver-backed jackal that also form monogamous pairs. So what's the difference then between monogamous pair and pair bonding? Well, monogamous pairs are for life. Pair bonding will last 4, 5, 6 seasons, and then they might swap partners, but they may come back together again. Now, look at all of those males and females in those images. They pretty much look similar, don't they? The 2 penguins, which one's male, which one's female? The owls, the jackals. So monogamy seems to be associated with low levels of sexual dimorphism. So that means where males and females look similar. That means they can cooperate in raising the offspring. So the offspring will respond to them. A lot of bird species form either monogamous pairs or they have pair bonding. Klipspringer, steenbok, duiker species. Those ones form monogamous pairs or pair bond. Right, family groups, prides or packs, or even coalitions. So any group will consist of multiple males and females as well as their offspring. And if you look at these images, look on the left with that pride of lions. I mean, there's a pride of lions in the Masai Mara at the moment that's 31. You know, they can get very big, but most will be smaller than that, will be in the teens, you know, 13, 14, 15. African wild dog, depending on where they are and how managed they are, will also have large groups. Now, cheetahs form what we call coalitions. And a coalition can be and is usually males. So that is 3 males who come together to hunt because either they're young, they haven't learned to hunt properly yet, or they just form a friendship bond. But that friendship bond doesn't necessarily last forever. They can suddenly, if a female comes in the mix, they get territorial and it can end in death. In African wild dogs, a pack there consists of a breeding pair, which is called the alpha pair. So they have rights to mating. So they're in a family group, but they have a dominance hierarchy. And it is their offspring and the siblings will also have dominance. So the offspring of the alpha female will be way more important than the offspring of one of the other females. But the pack will provide food for the pups and also often for the lactating mother. Or in some animals, they will have a mother that lactates, that stays behind, that is not necessarily the alpha. And then once mature, these lion cubs, these African wild dog pups will move away from their natal group, from where they were born. All right, matriarchies. And we spoke of a dominance hierarchy that was matrilineal. This one is a social system. So this is an example where we're kind of pairing. So matriarchy is a closely related group of females. And we said it's led by the oldest and the most experienced female called the matriarch. She dictates their activity, their movements, but large groups can split into smaller groups depending on resources. And this type of hierarchy or social system as well, because remember there's a hierarchy and a social system here, it's really interesting and it's really complex. And I'm not sure we all understand everything to do with it because more things are being found out all the time. So the males are actually often excluded from the herd or the clan once they reach a certain age. And here we've got spotted hyena, Crocuta crocuta. We've got elephants, and we've got the ring-tailed lemur of Madagascar. Now, any one of you that have an unfair view of hyenas, let me tell you, when you start trying to even get your mind around their social systems and how hyenas exist, it is blow your mind fascinating. It is something well worth looking into. All right, what about oligarchies? Well, these are the opposite of matriarchies because it's a social grouping of individuals run by a gang of dominant males. And they usually have their shared females and their combined offspring. So we have obviously baboons, chimpanzees. Now, I don't know how many of you would ever have come across or heard of the naked mole rat. This exists here in Africa and it's under our feet. They live underground. They're totally blind. Imagine, they're totally blind. They live underground in a small tunnel and they still have a social system and a dominance hierarchy. All right, temporary associations. Well, these are groups that are not really bonded and they're not territorial. So a territory means you have something you fight for, a piece of land that you fight for. But these animals will have overlapping home ranges. So an ostrich with another ostrich, a kudu with another kudu, a giraffe with another giraffe. But they do form temporary groups. When they come together, they'll wander around together and then they'll splinter off and move on. All right, harems. Different to an oligarchy again. A harem is actually usually seen in mammals, and it's a social grouping with one dominant male and a harem of females. So the number of females in that harem can actually vary greatly. So an impala ram can hold 20 to 30 breeding females. But I mean, that exhausts him. By the end of that breeding season, he has probably to fight his last fight. Some of them are strong enough to last a couple of breeding seasons. But if you're servicing 20 to 30 females, you haven't got much time to eat. So zebras can have 2 to 5 to 10 mares, depending on the amount of resources being food and water available. And some harems are permanent and some only happen in the breeding season. So with impalas, that's really only in the breeding season. And there we have an oryx in the dunes in. All right, insects. These are caste systems, and this is absolutely fascinating. because this is one of the most complex grouping systems seen in social insects and across the whole of the insect world. So you can have a colony, and if you see in the top left that termite mound, inside that termite mound is a colony, and that's split into a subset or a caste. And in a caste, the individuals are actually anatomically specialized to carry out a specific function. That means they are born to do that function. So a soldier ant is born with very strong jaws. A worker ant is born to carry leaves like those leaf cutters in that cartoon on the top right. The queen ant is born to breed. They cannot do anything else but the task they are born to do. But that role is vital to ensure the survival of the colony as a whole. And often in all of these caste systems, it's the queen who is the female responsible for sexual reproduction. And guess who she mates with? Males who are born to mate with her. They're reproductive males. And just to ensure that, which is how nature is so incredible, worker ants or soldier ants are born sterile. So they cannot mate. They will never be able to mate because they are sterile. So these organisms are often referred to as superorganisms because no single individual can survive without that entire colony. Ants, bees, termites, wasps. So the next time you're sitting there drinking your Coca-Cola and you have a bee or a wasp that comes to you, think about it. That is part of a superorganism. That is probably the scout, and the scouts are sent out ahead of everyone else to find where there might be food or sugar. So we saw the murmuration of starlings. That is not a social system. Flocking, which is what that was, herding or schooling in fish, these are behavior types. They're not social systems. But then we have interesting but short-lived relationships. And here we have two examples. On the left, we have an African wild dog who partnered with a family of jackals because she was kicked out from her pack because she bred and she was not an alpha female. And she was ostracized from her pack. Now, for an African wild dog to survive on its own is possible, but this female chose to partner with jackals, and she partnered for close on 6.5 months. And it was documented in an incredible documentary on Lucky, the African wild dog in the Okavango Delta. Then here in the top right, we have a lion that basically took on an antelope and really stayed with it for sort of 2 months before it died because it simply wasn't able to survive. The amazing thing is she went and found another baby antelope and took it on. So those are pretty crazy. We don't understand them. They're individual specific and they don't last. Although they can be successful momentarily, they simply don't last. All right, so let's turn to reproductive strategies. And these include things like mating dances, body languages, and ritualized displays. And we do these as humans as well. So if we look at behaviors and colors, you know, these are the types of things that are displayed through dances, through body language. We have physiological adaptations and we have anatomical structures. So let's look at these. This is a nyala displaying what we call philo-erection. Philo, hair, erection, put it up. So the hair is up here, indicating that this male is reproductively ready to mate, and it will be finding a female. Here we have the blue-balled monkey or the vervet monkey. The act of that genitalia having that bright blue color, that really, really attracts attention. And that's what it wants. The baboons, when we look at these baboons, we think they're nasty, but the wetter and pinker and more awful looking, the more sexually ready that baboon is. Fireflies. Now, I love to call them chimulimuli because in Lugandan, that's what it is. Fireflies have a different light flash depending on whether they're sexually ready or not, so that other fireflies can find them. Now, can you imagine what our artificial street lights and house lights do? I have fireflies in the garden here, and I don't leave the lights on at night because they may not be able to find a mate. And here we have a wonderful GIF of females. Now, female flamingos, that collect together to do this incredible courtship behavior. You know, it's not one-on-one, it's the whole flock that come together with this head turning and moving along. And that is a reproductive strategy to finding a mate. All right, what about physiological adaptations? Well, we have seasonal reproduction. So some mammals, they've evolved to breed only at certain times of the year. And that's when environmental conditions are favorable and resources are plentiful. So in Africa, where we are, generally this strategy matches with seasonal rainfall patterns. But of course, these are changing now due to climate change. And this is causing confusion in different wildlife species. We have embryonic diapause, and I wish I could have found you something that was done with an African animal, but we do have it here. We have it in elephant and we have it in hyena. And this is when the female can actually hold back on allowing the embryo to be fertilized so that she can control when that baby is going to be born. And it especially happens in animals that want a baby that's going to come 2 to 3 weeks later, or doesn't want it because of a drought or an impending storm. Multiple births. Of course, that is, you know, if you're going to have 3 pups, at least one is going to survive. If you only have 1 pup, then maybe none will survive. Increased reproductive rate. Well, the striped grass mouse in Kenya will have, 12, 14 young a month. And of course, that means they can produce large numbers of offspring in a short amount of time. And usually you're going to get that in small mammals who have short lifespans, like rodents. And then we have social and cooperative breeding, which is where females will take it in turns to look after each other's young, to even feed each other's young. And that ensures that the babies are going to survive. So these reproductive strategies fit into K or R. So if you're a K species, it generally means that you're a niche specialist. So you live in a specific environment. You know how to work in that environment, and you know how to catch things, how to survive. So often it's predators who are pretty high on the trophic pyramid. So they live in predictable environments, and they have few large offspring. So I can see up at the top, I've got the K and the R the wrong way around. So we're looking at there an elephant who has 1 young every 3 years. They have a slow growth with a late maturity and a long life. And there is often intense parental care and protection of the young. And then they invest in their offspring. And actually, the numbers of offspring are regulated mainly by intrinsic factors, their reproductive systems, what they require to survive. Our species, like there we have oysters and we have frogs or tadpoles in a pond there, they're niche generalists. So they generally, as long as the area sort of favors them, they can survive. They are usually prey, so they're much lower on that trophic pyramid. They usually live in pretty unpredictable environments in a tidal zone. So the tide's either in or it's out. Tadpoles, they're in an area that may have water, may not have water. So these animals, our species, will have many smaller offspring. They have fast growth because they've got to grow quick before that puddle dries up. They mature early and therefore they have a much shorter life. And often there is little parental care or protection of the young. And the individual offspring don't get any care whatsoever. And their numbers are regulated by extrinsic factors. So the weather, the climate, temperatures, that's what regulates them. All right, so let's look at different reproductive strategies. So the estrus cycle, and this is the estrus cycle of a buffalo. And an estrus cycle is the reproductive cycle of female mammals. We have it too. And in order to become fertile, there's all sorts of hormones that are released, the egg is released, and there's all sorts of cyclical changes in these that lead to ovulation and lead to mating behaviors. And some animals can alter this, not hugely, but a little bit to suit the seasons. Then we have scent glands, and these glands produce pheromones. Pheromones are chemical scents carried on the wind that are released from these glands, and they're used for communication, but also for attracting males. And you can see there the different glands and where they are. Now, this is something absolutely incredible. This is a copulatory plug. So this structure is found in some, including primates and rodents, but here I'm showing you an image of a snake. So that's the top left, and you can see this plug. So the female has been mated and the male has inserted a copulatory plug so that the sperm cannot come out. And it's made of mucus and it seals the female's reproductive tract so that the sperm of another male is not going to be able to reach her egg. And here we have a rhesus macaque that has a copulatory plug. I mean, unbelievable. And then we have a barbed penis. Now, I wonder if any of you have seen dogs on the side of the road mating. When a male dog mates, it has a barb that it is opened up so that the female cannot pull away, so that the male will leave his sperm in her. And quite a few species have this. Canines have it, and it will hold that penis, often pretty painfully, inside the female until all of his sperm is released. Now, if we go back to the snakes and their copulatory plug, a lot of energy is invested in making that material. You know, it takes energy to do that. All right, so staying on the hyena then. This that you are seeing in the top left is a female hyena. Now, no one fully understands this, but female hyenas have this incredible clitoris that looks similar to a male's penis. So if you're going to see a hyena, you may think that this elongated clitoris is a penis, but it's actually a pseudo penis, and it's almost indistinguishable from the male's. So the female's labia are actually fused together to form a scrotum. So you even think you're seeing a scrotum. You think you're seeing testes. And that morphology has evolved as a result of that female hyena's social structure. So remember, they're in a clan and the females are dominant. So the females are actually bigger than the males. They are more aggressive than the males, and they choose the mating opportunities. As a result, the female hyena actually produces high levels of the male hormone, and this allows this female to be the most dominant. So during mating, the male has to insert his penis into that female clitoris and push it back up inside her, which is kind of mad if you think that evolution achieved that. So then the big questions that we all struggle with is who, when, where, and with whom to mate. Well, when are you going to mate? That's actually going to be decided by the seasons, by the food and water availability, and the environmental conditions. Where are you going to mate? Well, that depends on predator pressures, the reaction of other social members to newborns. So for example, you will have giraffes that keep their baby away from the group for at least the first 3 to 4 days before they introduce it to the group. And also the presence and activities of humans. And a lot of animals will change their behavior as human activity increases or they are faced with it. Now, you see this very often on dairy farms where newborn calves are taken from their mothers at 3 days. A lot of those mothers will try to hide those babies, which is not normally a behavior associated with cows. And with whom to mate. And that, of course, is the big evolutionary question. Is it really the case that the strongest and the fittest males are the ones that pass their genes on? Or are we only reporting what we're seeing? In the top right here, you can see a mating pair of lions. And you can really see in that male lion how his testes are very swollen. Now, lion mating is often quite aggressive, and the male will often grab the female by the scruff of her neck. In the bottom right, you can see what's called a phlegm grimace. Now, a phlegm grimace, underneath most mammals, and humans have one that is now dysfunctional, but we used to have one that worked. Under your top lip is what's called a vomonasal organ, or your Jacobson's organ. And that basically, by opening his top lip like that, he's running the air and the pheromones from that female's urine over the Jacobson's organs, and that will tell him how sexually ready that female is. But it will also tell him if she's frightened, if she's stressed, you know, all sorts of things. And you will see animals doing it to us, donkeys, horses, elephants. They all exhibit the phlegm grimace. All right, what about sexual behavior in wild mammals? Well, this varies widely, and it depends on the species, the ecological niche, or the social organization. So what about mate selection? Well, mammals use a variety of cues to select mates. They can use visual cues. Remember, we saw philo-erection, so we can actually see the hair that is up. Auditory cues. You'll have, for example, an Achilles tendon that clicks very loudly in eland, or olfactory cues, like we saw with the phlegm grimace. The males can compete for access to the females, depending on which social group they fall under. But then, like with hyenas, it'll be the females that are the ones to choose who they will mate with. But of course, genetic compatibility, social status, and the quality of the potential mate's territory play a part. Now, just a word on genetic compatibility, because it is something that further research is being done. It may be that the animals are paired, but the ova and the sperm are not paired. And the ova will release a chemical that makes sure that that sperm is not able to implant. And that can be a reason for no young. Now, what about courtship behaviors? Well, most mammals, even us, we engage in courtship behavior. And that can involve displays of physical prowess. You can have vocalizations. You'll often hear the impala calling, or visual displays like we saw before again. And this can actually attract mates. It can establish your dominance hierarchies or enforce them, but it can also reduce aggression, because when there's a rule, you're not going to have a fight over it. What about copulation? Well, this varies widely. Some have highly ritualized copulatory behavior. There's some birds that simply will not mate with the male until the male has fed her some food. I mean, how crazy is that? That female waits to be fed, to be given a morsel of food by that male before she will allow mating. Some can mate quickly and opportunistically. So it's quick and it's done and there's nothing about it. You just move on. And the duration and the frequency of that copulation changes. You saw in that lion couple before, that can go on for 3 to 5 days. But that can change depending on the size of the male's testes, the reproductive cycle of the female, or the mating system of that species. Now, post-copulatory behavior. Sometimes you'll have the male grooming or guarding their mate. But in some species, males will actually try to prevent other males from mating with that female for a long time afterwards to ensure that it's his offspring that are born. So there's aggression, including one pair being killed. In some insects, when the female's mated, she kills the male. Or there's nothing, just walk away. What about parental care? Well, you can have cases where the male and the female care for their young, cases where only the female cares for her young, or only the male. And here we can see in the top left, how many legs does that African jacana have? Quite a few. Now that is the male African jacana, and that male carries all the chicks under his wings. So he can have 2 to 3, sometimes 4 chicks under each wing. And when there's danger, he'll quickly collect them up under his wings and run away. And that's the male jacana who looks after the chicks. There we can see a praying mantis, and the praying mantis are renowned. I'm sure you've heard of it. When the female has mated, she eats the male. There we have warthog. Now in warthog families, it's not uncommon from a female from the previous litter to actually stick around and then assist her mother in caring for the new piglets. And this is called alloparenting. And the sister actually helps with babysitting while the mother's away, or protecting them from predators, or teaching them new traits if necessary. And then we have obviously infanticide, which is awful. And this is when a male is determined that his genes will carry on. And if a new male comes into a pride, the male will kill all of the cubs from the previous male to ensure that his genes are the ones that go on. And it is horrific and not something I've ever seen or want to see. So then what is a healthy social population? I mean, we've seen all sorts of methods here. So what is healthy and what is social? Well, obviously, we've got social integration. If you look on the top left of that image, if you have good social integration, if you have a strong bond with your friends, with your parents, with your family members, you are going to be a lot more able to survive and weather hardship. If you have some sort of social status, and that is not social status in the world, but you are able to interact and therefore survive, you will do better. You're going to have a much higher chance of surviving if when you were young, you had low adversity. What is adversity? That means there was a low level of fighting in your social group. There wasn't a drought. You had food, you had water, you had friends. If you start life like that, you have a lot higher chance of surviving. And you're going to have a lot less mortality if you have more social advantages in life. And those social advantages come from forming bonds and meeting people, if we're talking about us. If you choose to go life alone, you're going to find it harder. So on that, I'm going to end and say thank you very much. I hope that I didn't fill you with too many new things, but I just want you to think back to those starlings and just look at those murmurations and remember, we are part of this incredible natural world. Thank you, everyone.
Hollie, thank you. That was really, really interesting. And I think everybody here agrees with me. Did you all enjoy that? Yes. So thank you. Have any of you got any questions for Hollie? Anything you want to know more about some of the animals? Maybe that male hyena, female hyena?
So I've got one question. With the bees, you spoke about the queen as a female, and you get specifically males that are born to mate the queen. But then do the other bees, do they have a gender?
No, they don't actually have a gender, but we have, and humans have, this incredible gene that is not actually active in us, but in fish, in a shoal of fish. If there's overfishing, and let's say what's left behind is males, and there's not enough females for that species to survive, some of those male fish will convert gender and become females to ensure the survival of the species. That blows your mind. Now, humans have that gene. We have it in us, but it's not turned on. So it's not something that's functioning or, to our knowledge, has ever functioned in the life of humans. So with caste systems, which is mostly insect, and the only reason I bring in fish is because you asked the question of gender. No, most insects don't. I would say 97% of the ants, though, that you see running around are classed as females. And that's simply because of the way that sex gene works. And I don't want to call it a sex gene because probably of that gene, only 0.0001% of it actually works as a sex gene.
Well, that's very interesting. As you can hear, we all found that very interesting. There is another question here. MJ just taking the mic to Bertha.
No, thank you for a good presentation that told us that there's a very big link between women and animals.
Just volume up.
Okay, repeat it, please, Bertha, your question.
Thank you, Hollie, for the good presentation that informed us that there's a very big link between women and animals. So now I look into patriarchy. Do animals also have patriarchy?
The question was, Hollie, is do animals also have patriarchy?
Because you just presented about matriarchy.
Because you only presented about matriarchy.
No, not really. We don't have a system that we call a patriarchal system because patriarchal system would be one male, one female. And in the cases where that happens, the female chooses. And we have oligarchies where you have a group of thugs, basically, or males that run the system. Or you have a harem where you have that one male zebra who has a harem of females. So no, we don't call anything a patriarchal system.
There's another question.
Okay, Hollie, there's another question.
Thank you. After thinking about the mouse or the rat that could have up to 14 babies a month, does that understand correctly? The strong life one. Yes. How long is gestation period?
So a gestation period of some mice can be 10 days to 14 days. They can literally reproduce that quickly. And that is because they are the very bottom of the trophic web. Everything feeds on them, everything. So that is why it is so important that our birds of prey stay in the skies. Those birds of prey will eat 12 to 15 rats a day. And imagine how many birds you've got up there. Now, if we then put rodenticide, we think we're going to kill all the rats. I'm afraid we won't. We're going to kill some rats that die in the open. The bird sees a dead rat, eats the dead rat, dies. Now you have no one killing your rats, and you will find huge rodent infestations where there are no birds of prey or no snakes. Snakes are also critical for eating rats and rodents, but rodents really reproduce incredibly fast. Of course, there are some rodents that are slower, and they all have their own reproductive strategies, but most of them can produce multiple litters a month if the resources are there. They also can hold back if there's a drought or there's an earthquake or something like that. They can hold back.
Any more questions? Well, Hollie, I think that's the questions from the group, but really thank you for a really great talk. That was really interesting. Just from my side, I want to say to the teachers, the more you learn about nature, because nature is amazing, the more you learn to love it, And the more you love nature, the more you'll protect it. And I think as teachers, the more you learn about it, the more knowledge you have to impart to your learners, the more your learners are going to fall in love with nature, and the more they are going to protect it. And that's really what we're after, is the protection of our environment, the protection of our planet. And as you as teachers, you have a very big task. So I hope you enjoy the journey of learning more about nature, and because it's really fascinating, and it's a wonderful journey you're on, and do it with a full heart or an open heart, and pass it on to your learners.